That's correct.
And you are aware, I presume, that the State Department has not provided those notes to the committee. Is that right?
I am aware.
So we don't have the benefit of reviewing them to ask you these questions.
Correct. I understand that they may be coming sooner or later.
Well, we would welcome that. You also testified earlier, Ambassador Sondland, or Ambassador Taylor, that President Trump had delegated some matters overseeing Ukraine policy to Ambassador Sondland, who is a big inaugural supporter of President Trump, even though Ukraine is not in his domain of the European Union. Is that right?
Several participants in the meeting in the Oval Office with President Trump, with the delegation to the inauguration of President Zelensky, told me of that conversation, and it was at that meeting, as I understand it from several participants, that President asked the participants to work with Mr. Giuliani on Ukraine policy.
Did you come to understand that Ambassador Sondland had a direct line of communication into President Trump?
I did.
And you testified, or rather in that text message, Ambassador Sondland says to call him after you wrote that. Did you in fact call him?
I did.
And what did he say to you?
He said that I was wrong about President Trump's intent, that there was no quid pro quo.
But did he say anything after that? Did he describe to you, I believe you said, I'll refresh your memory, that
Thank you.
He mentioned something in your opening statement. You said that he said that everything, I believe, and you had that in quotes, was actually contingent on the initiation of these investigations. What did he mean by everything?
Mr. Goldman, what he meant by everything was the security assistance and the White House meeting.
And I believe you also testified that he said he had made a mistake in relaying a message to the Ukrainians. What was that mistake?
The mistake he told me was earlier he had told, presumably President Zelensky and Mr. Yermak, that what was necessary for the White House meeting was the pursuit of these investigations. And he said he recognized that that was a mistake. It was not just the White House meeting that was dependent on the investigations. He said it was now everything. It included the security assistance.
So it was not just the White House meeting, it was also the security assistance.
Yes, sir.
And so even though President Trump was saying repeatedly that there is no quid pro quo, Ambassador Sondland relayed to you that the facts of the matter were that the White House meeting and the security assistance were conditioned on the announcement of these investigations. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
Now, you reference a television interview and a desire for President Trump to put Zelensky in a public box, which you also have in quotes. Was that in your notes?
It was in my notes.
And what did you understand that to mean, to put Zelensky in a public box?
I understood that to mean that President Trump, through Ambassador Sondland, was asking for President Zelensky to very publicly commit to these investigations, that it was not sufficient to do this in private, that this needed to be a very public statement.
And did you understand why it was needed to be in public as opposed to a private confirmation?
I had no further information on that.
Now, during this time period in early September, did you come to understand that from your conversations with the Ukrainians or other individuals that Ukraine felt pressure to initiate these investigations because of the conditionality of the White House meeting and the security assistance?
Mr. Goldman, here's what I know. I got several questions. Other officials got several questions as well from Ukrainians asking about the security assistance. So what I know is the security assistance was very important to the Ukrainians. They had begun to hear from Ambassador Sondland that the security assistance was not going to come until the investigations were pursued. What I heard from the defense minister, what the senators, what Senator Johnson and Senator Murphy heard in their conversation with President Zelensky was the clear concern, the urgent concern that Ukrainians had about the security assistance.
Now, you also described a conversation that you had with Ambassador Sondland a week later on September 8th. And in that conversation, in your opening statement, you described how Ambassador Sondland used the term stalemate. What did you understand the concern about a stalemate to be?
Ambassador Sondland said that if President Zelensky did not clear things up in public, we would be at a stalemate. He began that, again, by repeating, this is not a quid pro quo, but if President Zelensky did not clear things up in public, we would be at a stalemate. And what I understood in that meeting, the meaning of stalemate was the security assistance would not come.
Right. So even though he said the words, there were no quid pro quo, he then went on to say, but the security assistance will not come unless these investigations are done. Is that what you're saying?
My understanding, that's what was meant by stalemate.
You also described in your opening statement a discussion you had about President Trump being a businessman who wanted to have people pay up before signing the check. And what did you understand that to mean?
This was an explanation that Ambassador Sondland gave me about his understanding of President Trump's thought process. Ambassador Sondland is a businessman. President Trump's a businessman. He was explaining to me the relationship, the understanding that a businessman would have when he was about to sign a check. And by that, he clearly meant that President Trump was thinking about or had in front of him the possibility of providing security assistance to Ukraine. It was similar to writing a check to someone who you're about to send. He used that analogy very clearly to indicate that this would require something. If that person owed him something before he signed the check, he wanted to get whatever he was owed paid back to him. And Ambassador Volker used very similar language about a week later, which indicates to me that they had that conversation as well.
Did Ukraine owe anything to the United States?
Ms. Goldman, they didn't. They owed appreciation for the support, and they were getting support, and they appreciated that. But there was nothing owed to President Trump on that.
But you understood the upshot of this comment made by both Ambassador Sondland and Ambassador Volker to be that President Trump believed that Ukraine owed him something personally. Is that accurate?
It's hard to understand, but there was a feeling by President Trump that he, and this came out in the transcript. I'm sorry, this came out in the discussion with the inaugural delegation when they came back to have a conversation with President Trump on May 23rd, that he had a feeling of having been wronged by the Ukrainians. And so this was something that he thought they owed him to fix that wrong.
Right, but what he was talking about, as you understood it, because in the context of the conversation, is that what he owed him were these investigations that he wanted.
That right? Would have been to fix the wrong, exactly.
And those investigations into the 2016 election and Biden and Burisma.
That's correct.
Now, during this early period in September, we've talked a little bit about the fact that you continually heard that the president was repeatedly saying that there was no quid pro quo. Is that right?
That's correct.
And he still says that repeatedly today. But regardless of what you call it, whether it's a quid pro quo, bribery, extortion, abuse of power of the office of the